This is a map of the Columbia Basin. And let's talk a little bit about the Columbia right now. The Columbia was, until very recently, the world's largest producer of chinook salmon. And what that meant for the Pacific Northwest is that it became an important trading center for thousands of years. The Celilo Falls has been occupied for at least 10,000 years, and it wasn't only Celilo, but at least a dozen other places all throughout the basin where people came from a long ways away to trade because they knew that the protein they were getting couldn't really be matched in almost any other location. And so what we did in the early 20th century is we kind of traded what was, until recently, one of the world's greatest salmon producing river systems. We traded that for what has become one of the world's most prolific producers of hydropower. And you can see by this map from the National Marine Fisheries Service that the Columbia has been kind of thoroughly dammed, and you see what's called in this map an anthropogenic barrier. That's a fancy word for what is a dam. And what I want to talk about this evening, because I think it's super important for the future of salmon, and I want to make this pitch specifically to members of Oregon Wild and their board and staff, is what I think is the last best chance we have to bring back some semblance of plenitude to this river system, which is absolutely magnificent, one of the world's great river basins, an absolute jewel of a river basin that stretches from the continental divide to the continental shelf. And unfortunately, we've lost a huge portion of it, but there's a way that we can get a big chunk of it back. So if you look at this map of the Columbia, you can see the green areas are what's accessible. And I want you to look at, as you're looking at your screen, the right-hand most chunk of what's accessible here. There's a big stripe that says Salmon River, and then downstream from that to your left is another one that says Snake River. So those two, the salmon is a tributary of the Snake, and the Snake Basin is responsible for producing half of all of the salmon that once swam in the Columbia. So if you think about this in historic terms, you go back to 150 years ago, 10 to 30 million salmon a year were swimming up the Columbia every year. And half of those fish all came out of this section, the Snake and the salmon. It's not only the salmon, but all of its tributaries, of which there are many. You're talking about the Clearwater, the Lochsaw, the Selway, the Lemhi. If any of you have had the privilege of exploring this territory, you'll know what I'm talking about. I'm thinking about driving from Portland. If any of you have had the good luck to go do a trip on the Salmon or the Middle Fork of the Salmon, and you drive up you drive up over Banner Pass, and you drop down into this vast meadow, and what you're looking at is a meadow that's just interlaced with spawning and rearing habitat. And what you're looking at when you look off towards the Stanley Basin is one of the world's greatest salmon nurseries. Think about a river like the Middle Fork Salmon producing 500,000 chinook a year, or its tributary on the South Fork of the Salmon River producing that same number of fish, and some estimates say even more. All right, let me change slides here. Hang on. Uh-oh, why is it not letting me change slides? Hang on.
Might use just your arrow keys on your
there
keyboard.
we go. Let's start at the beginning here. I want you guys to look at this slide. I mentioned earlier that 137 species depend on one level or another in the Pacific Northwest on the presence of salmon. This picture is taken in 2019. It was a Lummi canoe journey. And these people were paddling and drumming through the night out in the Salish Sea, which is basically all that vast amount of sort of protected coastal waters off the coast of Western Washington. This juvenile orca salmon came and paid these paddlers and drummers a visit. And I don't think that's an accident. If you think about the intelligence of these creatures, these orcas, these particular Salish Sea orcas, they're called the southern residents, and I haven't met a biologist yet who really likes that name because it isn't really specific to the place where they have evolved. These particular whales evolved to eat chinook salmon, and their whole hunting strategy and indeed their entire existence is revolved around hunting and eating chinook. And for tens of thousands of years, they lived sort of the lives that most of us might aspire to in the summertime. They would hunt and eat for a few hours in the morning. And if you think about it, if you're keyed on chinook salmon and it's 200 years ago or 500 years ago, and you can find a dozen 50 or 60 pound chinook to fill your belly, the rest of the day in the Salish Sea in the summertime is just going to be spent sort of lollygagging around, trying to figure out which other orca you might want to have some offspring with, playing around. And this is the world that this fella, Ken Balcom, discovered in the early 1970s when he started studying these whales. Ken spent the ensuing next 50 years out in a boat looking at these whales. And as a measure of how intelligent they are, I'll tell you a quick story. Ken was the only person doing this work in the mid to late 70s. He was a naval officer, so he knew his way around the ocean, knew his way around a boat pretty well. And he'd been following a pod of these salmon-eating killer whales for a few days, and a thick bank of fog rolled in. And he was just, it was thick soup, and he couldn't find his way visually back to where he came from. But he's a naval officer, he wasn't too worried about it. And so he was just kind of, using his skills to sort of plot his way back across the Salish Sea in the fog. And, keep in mind, this guy's a naval officer and a scientist and not given easily to a lot of whimsical ideas. But he said off the bow of his boat, these whales just started kind of splashing around on either side of it. And he got this sense that maybe they wanted to take him somewhere. So he started following them. Or they led him across the sound and took him right back to his slip in Roach Harbor, right on the west side of San Juan Island, 15 miles across the sound in the fog. That's how smart these guys are. So I got to know Ken. I made a film called Damned to Extinction. I spent a lot of time with him. Unfortunately, last December, Ken passed away. I miss him a great deal. He was a wonderful human being and a fabulous scientist. And it's so rare anymore that we have a scientist who's able to devote his career in the field to one species. And so the world that so many others are studying right now, which is how these orcas, might survive into the future, owes a lot to the work that Ken did. And Ken spent the last 10 years of his life really, he made, I guess, the leap from being a field scientist to being an activist. And his main cause was trying to get behind, and a lot of other people behind, the idea that 4 lower the 4 dams on the lower Snake River in eastern Washington need to come down. This was a hard transition for a guy that was in his 80s, but he made the best of it. He met with Governor Inslee. He spent countless hours talking to whoever would listen about the biological necessity to remove these dams. And this is kind of what I want to spend the rest of my time this evening talking to you about, is the absolute necessity to get rid of these dams. And like, again, I'm hoping that Oregon Wild might be able to get behind the cause. And as I'll explain a little bit later, there's more momentum behind this cause than we've had for quite some time. So this is a picture of the lower Snake River prior to the construction of those 4 dams. And for those of you that are even passingly familiar with the history of dam construction in the United States in the 20th century, there was a race on this river. Keep in mind that from 1930 to 1980, we put something like 90,000 dams on the American landscape. They were going up, faster than anyone could count. And oftentimes they were going up without regard to the ecological consequences. And that was particularly the case here on the Snake, where from 1961 to 1975, we put 4 dams on a stretch of the lower Snake River from Pasco, which is one of those tri-cities in eastern Washington, up to Lewiston, which is just south of Pullman for anybody that happens to be a Cougs fan. Go Cougs. And what that did, without sort of regard or too much forethought about the ecological consequences, is that it absolutely choked the last remaining avenue that wild salmon had to get to what I had described earlier as one of the world's great salmon nurseries. You think about the Stanley Basin and all of that 4.4 million acres of wilderness or otherwise roadless area in eastern Washington, eastern Oregon, and central Idaho that was actually set aside by Senator Frank Church in the 80s as a sanctuary for salmon. If you read that original wilderness bill that he wrote, the purpose of it was as a sanctuary for salmon. Well, that was one thing that was going on, was the campaign to set that whole area aside as wilderness and a sanctuary for salmon. And on the other side, you had the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Bonneville Power Administration and their constituents, who saw the final sort of piece of the puzzle and the full industrialization of the Columbia as the construction of these 4 dams. And so there was really a kind of race. The Corps of Engineers could see the handwriting on the wall. They knew that public sentiment was turning against the construction of large dams. And so they were really pushing hard to get this done before it, now we're in an era where, at least in this country, we're not building any more large dams. But I want to give you a quick look at what was lost during that time. That 140 miles of the Snake River from Pasco to Lewiston included some huge sections of whitewater, including at least one Class 5 rapid called Texas, which was drowned below what is now Little Goose Dam. But it was also a gathering place for what was, until recently, an absolute riot of salmon spawning, rearing, and return. And so if you go even further back into history, this is a family called the Grasser family, and they had a fish camp right across on the Washington side of the Snake River, just downstream of Lewiston, Idaho. So, and if anybody is familiar with this part of the world, if you drive up the Snake River from Pasco, you eventually arrive in Lewiston, and Lewiston is the name of the town on the Idaho side. Well, let me back up a step. There's actually 3 rivers that come together right here. There's the Clearwater that comes out of the Bitterroot Mountains in Idaho, and then there's the Snake that comes in from the south. And okay, so let me back up even further step. I guess it's only two rivers that come together right there, but the confluence right there should be one of the world's most spectacular places, because you have two amazing rivers coming together. And what you have instead is what the Army Corps of Engineers has created. Prior to that, what you had was what you see here in this picture, the Grasser family fish camp. And I was reminded of this recently when I was in Alaska. If you look at how they're fishing here, they're throwing seine nets. So you didn't need a hook or a line. You just went out and set nets in the river, and you could pull in, a winter's worth of protein in a few days. And you can see by the number of people here in the 1920s, this was no small undertaking. People did this every year to put up, the winter's food against every other kind of vagary. And a friend of mine whose family's got long roots in the Lewiston area said nobody really revered salmon. Salmon was what you ate when you didn't have enough money to buy anything else. And so it was a huge part, even as recently as the 1920s and 30s, of the sort of food economy of the Snake River Basin. If you go back even a little further in history, this is Marm's Cave. This is another piece of what was lost when we built those 4 dams. When Marm's Cave was discovered in the 1960s, it was the oldest known settlement in the Western Hemisphere. There were radiocarbon dating of old beads, a pair of old sandals that went back 11,000 years. Now that seems kind of paltry because we know of settlements that are much older. But at the time, this was a big deal. And the way that relates to the sort of race to finish these dams is that the archaeologists who discovered this site is called Marm's Cave because the rancher that owned the land, that was his last name, Marms, and he let the archaeologists have access to this site. And you can see they sort of excavated away the opening of this cave. And the Corps of Engineers was informed of the cultural and archaeological significance of this site, and the archaeologists asked for a reprieve. They said, hey, can you just hold off on closing the gates on Lower Monumental so we can at least finish our research? And the Corps' reply was more or less, dig faster, we're going to close this thing. And a couple senators from Washington and Idaho tried to broker a compromise. What they came up with was a coffer dam that was built kind of around the edges of the cave that you're looking at here. When the gates were closed on Lower Monumental, the coffer dam failed and the whole site was flooded. So keep in mind that Marms was not the only site like this. Between Pasco and Lewiston, the rough estimate is there was probably between 60 or 80 sites that were of equal significance. So here's just another picture of a seine net with some big fat salmon in it. These guys are pretty happy to have what they have, as you can see. So here's a picture of the free-flowing Lower Snake. You can see that there's a happy fisherman tooling along in his car, and it reminds me, since Oregon Wild is rightfully focused on the beauty that we have here in our own state, this section of the Snake reminds me of the lower Deschutes, and I really feel like if I'm ever lucky enough to see this section of water free flowing again, that we might have a second Deschutes to go to just another couple hours away. All right. So if we think about the ability of salmon to swim long distances, and you think about a fish that maybe this time of year came into the river or was staging in the river at Astoria, and how far would they swim? Well, this is a picture of a trip that I took on the Middle Fork salmon a few years back. This is up near Big Creek on the Middle Fork salmon in Idaho. And what you're looking at here is that those granite mountains in the background of that picture are part of a larger structure called the Idaho batholith. And the Middle Fork salmon sort of cuts through the middle of this giant granite outcropping that occupies a large part of central Idaho. And Chinook salmon would make it not only all the way up to Big Creek, which is 800 miles from Astoria, but another 75 miles further upstream into Bear Valley Creek and into Marsh Creek. And I would just encourage anybody who's inspired by the presence of salmon in the Pacific Northwest and is wondering how they might be able to help, how in the era of climate chaos that we might be able to do something for these fish to make sure that they're around in future generations. I would encourage you to drive to this part of the world up into Stanley, and you can do this as soon as this weekend. And you don't even have to hike very far to do it. You don't have to paddle a boat downstream like I have shown you in this picture here. You don't have to have the skills to row down a wilderness river. You can literally park on the side of the highway right outside of Stanley, and with nothing more than the willingness to sit and wait, you're going to see some of these Chinook that have migrated 900 miles from the Pacific. There are still a few of them that make it every year. And I don't give activists advice about how they should conduct their, passionate activism, for the same reason that I don't give dating advice, because I don't really know how your particular interface or your particular passion with the natural world is expressed, or what you're looking to accomplish precisely. But I think if you take the time to go look at these fish, observe them, and ponder their long journey, not only 900 miles out from Astoria up to where you'll see them spawning, but a couple thousand further miles out in the Pacific, seeing parts of the world that none of us will ever see. They have an ability to speak their own way. And what sort of attracted me to this story many, many years ago is when I saw those fish in Idaho. And if you don't have the chance to do it, you can certainly go see fish spawning closer to home, and you can certainly ponder the same sorts of questions. So I'll stop there for now. I want to thank Oregon Wild for hosting the presentation. And I'll go ahead and open it up. Well, actually, we're going to hear from Sammy first, and then we'll open it up to questions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Steven, for your presentation. That was great. So my name is Sammy Godlove. I am Oregon Wild Central Oregon Field Associate. I just want to take a few minutes to update you all on some exciting things we are working on at Oregon Wild that is relevant to salmon and river systems. I'll try and keep it brief so that we have plenty of time for Q&A. So let me share my screen.
Sammy, you have a little bit of an echo.
Oh, well, I don't know how to fix that. Oh, wait, we're at the back. Okay, so as we look to a future of dam removal and restoring wild free-flowing rivers and the salmon runs that depend on them, we at Oregon Wild are also working to ensure that our remaining wild rivers and streams in Oregon stay that way and are protected for fish and wildlife habitat, for outdoor recreation, clean drinking water, and all the other cultural and ecological values that these waterways provide. So I'm going to talk just a bit about the really, truly historic opportunity that we have right now to protect rivers and watersheds and key habitats across the state. And if you haven't guessed yet, that historic opportunity is the River Democracy Act. Okay, so the first introduced by Senator Ron Wyden in 2021, the River Democracy Act would add over 3,200 miles of rivers and streams across Oregon to the National Wild and Scenic River System. So all these bright neon green lines that you see on this map here, these are all rivers that would be designated as wild and scenic under the River Democracy Act. And in addition to protecting the streams themselves, the RDA would also designate and protect a half-mile buffer on either side of each stream. So this amounts to about 2 million acres of public lands across Oregon that would be protected in this one bill. And so the dark blue lines that you see on the map here, those are rivers in Oregon that are already designated as wild and scenic. Okay, so what is wild and scenic designation? How does it protect rivers? Passed in 1968, the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act is the strongest form of river protection that we have and our strongest river conservation tool. This text on the slide here is pulled directly from the statutory language of the Act. So the Act was passed in response to rapid dam building and development on rivers throughout the early to mid 20th century, as Steven was talking about. And free-flowing rivers were becoming increasingly rare in the US, and people felt the need to protect them, the remaining ones. So 8 rivers were designated in the original legislation in 1968, including Oregon's own Rogue River, which you can see in the photo on the slide. And the protections for these original 8 rivers and the many that have been designated since include the prohibition of dams, bank alteration, as well as any mineral, gas, or oil extraction. Additionally, wild and scenic rivers are designated for one or more outstandingly remarkable values, or ORVs, as we call them. As the text in this slide states, these values can include scenic, recreational, geologic, fish and wildlife, historic, cultural, and other values as well. And the agency that is tasked with managing the river, each river, is then required to protect and enhance those values. So basically, any activity that would degrade one or more of those values is prohibited. And so while some of our most iconic rivers in Oregon, such as the Rogue here, also the Mackenzie, the Deschutes, the John Day, the Clackamas, the Grand Ronde, the Owyhee, these are already protected as wild and scenic, but this only makes up 2% of Oregon's 111,000 total river miles that are designated now. So that means 98% of our river miles are still left unprotected. I'm actually going to go back to this map again. So again, the dark blue lines, these are the rivers in Oregon that are currently designated as wild and scenic. And these designated rivers amount to a bit over 2,100 miles. And again, the River Democracy Act would more than double that amount by adding an additional 3,200 miles. Okay. So these are just some of the rivers that would be given wild and scenic protections under the River Democracy Act. From these photos, you can tell that these rivers all have tremendous scenic and recreational values. Tumalo Creek, which is off on the right side of the screen, and the majestic Tumalo Falls in the photo there, is just down the road from where I am now in the Bend office of Oregon Wild. It's a great place to hike, fly fish, enjoy nature, bike. It's a really pretty place. And then also Bridge Creek, which is a tributary of Tumalo Creek, which you can't see here, but it comes into Tumalo Creek just above the falls. It's another RDA stream, and it's also where the city of Bend gets its drinking water from. And that drinking water, clean water, is one ORV that would be protected under the bill as well. So a really unique and exciting aspect of the RDA is that it would protect many miles of headwater and important tributary streams. This is something that a lot of past wild and scenic designations has left out. So most designations so far has focused on the big, recognizable, popular rivers like the road. Even though these main stem rivers were protected, their tributaries were left largely unprotected. And of course, the water in the tributaries is the water that eventually flows into the main stem rivers. So just gonna go back one more time to the map. I just wanna show you these clusters of tributary streams that would be protected. So you can see down in Southwest Oregon where it says Siskiyous. This cluster of green lines here are all tributaries of the Rogue. I don't know if you can see my mouse, maybe not, but there's also a lot of tributaries of the Umpqua and the Mackenzie in the Central Cascades, and then also of the John Day and the Grand Ronde in Northeast Oregon. So this bill is historic because instead of just protecting a single river or stream segment, it aims to protect large watersheds. And that includes the main stems, the tributaries, the headwaters, and the adjacent forests. And it's these headwater and tributary streams that provide important spawning and rearing habitat for salmon and steelhead. They also provide cold water refugia and climate resiliency in the face of more frequent drought conditions and rising stream temperatures. They also are sources of clean water and water quality. And these are all things that salmon populations need to survive and to thrive. Okay, so you can visit our website at oregonwild.org/rivers to learn more about the River Democracy Act, the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, and how you can help get this historic legislation passed. So Wild and Scenic River designation takes an act of Congress, and that means that it's up to you, it's up to all of us to tell our congressional members that we want to see these rivers protected. And you can do that by writing, emailing, calling, tweeting at Senators Wyden and Merkley and your local representative, and just tell them that you support the River Democracy Act, you want to see it passed. Senator Wyden is also having a virtual town hall with the Oregon League of Conservation Voters next week on the 22nd. If you attend, you can ask him a question about the River Democracy Act or just express your support for it. And town halls, whether virtual or in person, they're great and important because they are the best opportunities to speak directly to your member of Congress. And we'll send out all of these links in a follow-up email, probably tomorrow or Friday, so be on the lookout for that. We also have some petitions and specific links that are specific to the lower Snake River dams. So those will be on there as well. And just lastly, if you are really passionate and you want to do more or learn more, feel free to reach out and email me. There is no shortage of ways for you to take action and help protect Oregon's salmon and Oregon's rivers.